your squad mates, and issue your own powers. And it's very akin to the classic isometric control of your squad, albeit ours is a real-time perspective. A little slowed down to get at that, you focus in under duress, but you can do all the same tactical movements. In fact, it's required for success. So you can issue movement orders, position guys on the flanks, do target prioritization, ripple off the powers. The cool thing is you're also able to queue up things. So you can say, you go here, do this, then do that, go. So if you're like a football person, think of it a little bit like the huddle. And you also have the ability to call audibles on the battlefield. Our goal being to bring that tension of, it's one thing to sit on your couch, stroking the beard, sipping your drink, go, what will I do next? It's another to have to deal with that in real time. So we're trying to give that fantasy fulfillment for the XCOM fan that was like, what would it be like to be one of these guys? Now you're on the battlefield having to do it, and it's very rewarding. So in a way, it's very, it's hyper XCOM. And at first blush, many people might think, oh, it's a shooter XCOM, but there's a lot more sort of tactical DNA.
I can see that here. It seems like it's almost complementary, the other side of the coin to Enemy Unknown. There's a shared sort of foundation there, but they're just sort of expressing themselves a little bit differently.
Exactly. I mean, our true hope is to get some of the gamers that may think, misguided as they may be, I don't like turn-based games, right? Bad viewpoint, but to bring them into the XCOM franchise via something that's a little more real-time, a little more tense, a little more action-y, but not an action game, as well as give classic XCOM fans a new perspective on the battlefields they're familiar with.
Now we're seeing some crazy weapons here. I love the weapons in Enemy Unknown, and I just love the series and the way it approaches the arsenal. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are we seeing here?
Sure thing. So when we kick off in 62, we're dealing with real-world weapons of the period, sort of the bullets, shotguns, 45s, that sort of thing. As XCOM gains access to further alien technology, we start to go up the tech tree. So familiar weaponry like the laser rifles, laser pistols, through the plasma chain are all going to be there for the XCOM fan.
Sweet.
And a host of sort of new, fun ones, and some old favorites like the blaster launcher from the original. In addition to weapons, our game is a lot about also the powers and abilities that your agents get equipped with. So as you level them up and you customize them among their various classes, you get all sorts of sort of fantastical aspects of unleashing woe upon your enemies in the battlefield. So give you a lot of tools in which to parse through the combat spaces, almost like a puzzle, come up with your own combination, your own plan, and then see how it goes.
Awesome. So I know you're probably not going to want to get too heavily into the story. Obviously, you guys are still, you're kind of making your big reemergence here, and you're going to want to leave some surprises to the player. But what's kind of the journey look like? Obviously, the Bureau is sort of starting out. Where is this journey going to take our characters?
Well, I mean, the biggest spoiler of all is that aliens attack, and we have to deal with them. So during the course of the story, it's one of the first times we're able to tell an XCOM story with a central character. William Carter is your viewpoint. So you're there from the progression of XCOM being founded, basically being put on our heels in the sort of nooks and crannies of America, fighting an enemy that's way above our ability to deal with. So you'll have to mount that offensive and go through that plot line with the additional characters as you gain an understanding of the enemy, start to be able to push back, and then ultimately defeat them. Along the way, there's a huge number of different narrative devices. We have a conversation system. The base itself is almost a social space, akin to RPGs in terms of it has its own secondary and tertiary quests that give a lot more narrative.
And this is in between missions then. You're talking to different members of the team.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And so you have and you have an ability to have a little bit of agency of how the plot resolves itself. The fate of different American citizens that have been infected by a virus, we call the Sleepwalker virus, is in your hand. Ultimately, the resolution at the end is based on the choices and decisions that you make at a few critical junctures. So we're given a lot for the player to have a bit of say in how this all resolves itself, and then spiking the ball up when we wrap our story. This sort of hidden origin story. We cannot let the Russians know how close we came to defeat. So our government has covered this up, but we toss the ball up for a nod for games like Firaxis' Enemy Unknown or any of the classic games in the franchise as sort of the, hello guys, and now history resumes as you know it. So I think it's going to be very fun, and especially as an XCOM fan, there's enough nods in the DNA and the sort of the universe that we're tying into, and then sort of rounding out, that I think it's going to be a fun adventure.
Now, I think it's so interesting that this game is set in the 60s. I mean, how are you guys, you're the creative director, how are you guys kind of approaching the period element of this game?
Well, it's very important to us at 2K Marin to tell stories that go beyond just like, and then aliens attack, or with the Bioshock 2, and you're back to Rapture. We want a little bit of subtext. I have a lot of secondary narratives. The 60s is a great period with a political tension between the arms race between the US and USSR and the space race. It gives us a rich fabric, not the least of which is a social fabric of the time, dealing with issues of race and gender, right? It's not an America that we know today. So for you, the player, we use this backdrop, we go look at the period itself. So before going to Mad Men or the more modern looks back, which is obviously what we did, we looked at a lot of movies of the time. How did the 60s show itself to itself? So we looked at advertising, we looked at movies, watched a lot of Hitchcock, classic James Bond. We obviously went back to Time magazines and different things in the period. Nothing's as valuable as Google Image and whatever
Oh, yeah.
to try to get tone. And in general, just sort of sucked in as much as we could of the period, because it's like an RPG, it's our campaign setting, and it's a rich campaign setting from which to draw these little micro stories from. And so we had a fun time dealing with it, and dealing with issues that go beyond just alien invasion, and touching on some of the social and political aspects of the time period, because that to us told a richer story.
Now, what would you say to people who are big fans of the turn-based tactical games, who look at this and say, it's a little, I don't know if this is where I want this series to go? I mean, what would you say to them?
Well, I think at its heart, even just in any XCOM game, it's not an everyone's cup of tea kind of franchise, right? It's a very specific type of gamer that likes that combination of strategic, tactical play